Hi, my name's Nicole, and today I'm going to be joined by Simon Munk, who is the campaigns manager for the London Cycling Campaign. So, thank you so much for joining us today. Really happy to have you here. So, for those who don't know, tell us a little bit about the London Cycling Campaign and what you do.
So fairly obviously it kind of does what it says in the tin. So we are a campaigning charity. We have a membership charity. So we've got 11,500 odd members dotted around all over London. And we've then got supporters and people who follow us on Instagram or whatever on top of that as well. And we campaign to make cycling better in London. There's a slight misnomer in the name these days, really, because we are increasingly not just talking about cycling. We're talking about walking, we're talking about active travel, we're talking about sustainable travel, and we talk a lot about climate and climate emissions and car use and private motor traffic as well. So we are trying to make sure that London shifts towards being a lower carbon, lower car, more walking and cycling future. And so we're not here to just represent 11,500 members. As I said, most of them, nearly all of them, will be people who cycle quite regularly in London. But we are also here to represent people who would like to cycle in London but don't currently, who would like to get around without using the car but don't currently, etc. So I think that kind of covers the what we are. For our members, we do third-party kind of public liability insurance. We have exclusive discounts in shops. We have a membership magazine, etc. And then their membership also funds, so as well as getting kind of benefits for members, being a member, and you get legal helpline and things like that, just as most kind of cycling charities and most organisations like us do. We also then campaign specifically on, as I said, the broad sweep of sustainable active travel in London, but particularly cycling, obviously, as a focus. So we have borough groups of volunteers in pretty much every London borough. There's 33 boroughs. We kind of in about 30, I think, at the moment with active groups. And we have a staff team as well. And what we aim to do is lobby the mayor, talk to City Hall and TfL, talk to borough councillors and officers, talk to everyone and anyone about how we can make cycling better, how we can improve the rollout of cycling infrastructure and active travel schemes, how we can improve London for across its whole spread.
Lovely. And I guess my next two questions, sorry, sort of tie in together. And you've got many campaigns going on in the moment, but the one that sort of jumped out to me was your road to net zero in London by 2030. So what sort of needs to change to get people out of their cars and onto their bikes? Because it seems like every man and their dog are on their bikes in London, doesn't it? So like what is it that needs to change?
So yeah, it does. We've had since the pandemic, particularly, we've had a massive spike in cycling. We had a big spike in cycling kind of rates previously when the congestion charge first came in. So we have had some changes done, and particularly of late, you get on the embankment, on the east, west, or C3 cycleway, and it's tens of thousands a day, and it's jam packed with cyclists of all types and all speeds. And so it can feel like London is a cycling city, but actually the mode share for cycling is still somewhere just shy of 3%, I think, the last time TfL measured it. So what we have is we have the start of a network of cycle routes that are safe, comfortable, direct, and that's got to be part of the key here, which is, we know that asking people to use their car less doesn't work. We know that asking people to cycle more doesn't work unless you create the conditions to enable lots of people to cycle, and particularly lots of people who don't look like me increasingly, because lots of people who do look like me, i.e. middle-aged men, white men, tend to cycle. We are quite happy to mix it with traffic. We don't have much of a fear response to being forced to ride, on a 30-mile-an-hour road with thousands of other vehicles. So what we need, if we want to see cycling diversify and we want to see cycling become a mass mode of transport, we need safe, direct, comfortable routes, which either means on main roads, protecting cyclists from physically separating them from motor vehicles, or on side roads, it means making sure those side roads, vehicles that are there's not many of them and they move quite slowly and calmly. So that's why we call for cycle tracks. that's the main roads, and low traffic neighbourhoods, that's the side roads, as two of the kind of key parts of what we need to enable more people to cycle. And that's, yeah, very much part of we have a campaign called Climate Safe Streets, which is very much about the mayor having committed quite rightly to a net zero for London for 2030, means we're going to need to shift a load of people out of cars. So we're still, the mayor's transport strategy a few years ago said that mode share for car use in London was 36%. I think that needs to come down to 20% in the next few years. And on top of that, we know that the majority of car journeys in London, and in fact motor vehicle journeys in London, full stop, could be done by other means. So there, you know, for every massive tipper lorry that you see that has got like loads of concrete and rubble and it's moving stuff around that couldn't possibly be carried on a bicycle, for every, you know, disabled person in a wheelchair who can't get on a bike, there are loads of people driving journeys in London that could be done by cycling, walking, or on a bus or tube or whatever. So we need to shift those journeys dramatically if we want to get to zero emissions. And yeah, Sadiq has said again, his team has been modelling this. They've said that they need a 27% cut in motor vehicle kilometres driven by 2030. So we're here to basically help that happen. We think obviously cycling is a very key part of that. You know, we can't roll out loads more bus routes in London. We're kind of stuffed on that one. It's very hard to do. We certainly can't, as the Elizabeth line, brilliant though it is, has proven, we can't deliver another 5 tube lines, you know, next year. That's not going to happen. And most easily walkable journeys are walked. You know, we are a walking city already. If you want to talk about a mass active travel mode, it is walking. You know, loads of people walk. Most people, if they're going to pop to the shops, they do walk to the shops, you know, etc. So walking journeys are already quite a high proportion, you know, of journeys that could be walked are walked, but that isn't the case for cycling. So we know that if we want to hit those climate targets and we want to enable mode shift, we have to get people cycling more. And that, yeah, as I said, that's cycle tracks, low traffic neighbourhoods, and cycle parking, and lots of other things as well, you know, to enable people to make that switch.
And you have loads of campaigns, you're doing all of this work. So who do you work closely with to enable this to happen? Is it government? Is it the mayor? So who are you working closely with to ensure that all of this does happen?
So we pretty much work at all levels. So we talk to the DfT and government and Active Travel England, you know, on a regional, you know, countrywide basis, as it were, all the time. We probably talk far more because, you know, we're the London cycling campaign, we're not the England cycling campaign or whatever. We talk far more to the mayor and TfL and City Hall. So that's on a regional kind of London-wide, city-wide basis. But we then also, as I said, we've got volunteer groups in I think 30 odd out of 33 boroughs that are active at the moment, and we work with them and local councillors and officers down to the borough level. You know, Sadiq, our current mayor, and the Mayor of London controls about 5% of the roads in London. 95% of the roads in London are not controlled directly by TfL. So funding comes from TfL and it disperses it to boroughs. But we're there to push for more funding for government. We're there to push for the mayor to prioritise cycling and walking, and we're there to push the mayor to kind of push for rollout, you know, with his walking and cycling commissioner and TfL. But we're also there to, in each and every borough, to say each borough needs to play its part, because, you know, what we're seeing, and it's really exciting times, is particularly since the pandemic, we're seeing, you know, a bunch of boroughs, more boroughs than ever, rolling out cycle infrastructure and shifting modes, people in modes, you know, really rapidly now. So, you know, we're seeing boroughs like Islington and Waltham Forest and Lambeth and Camden and Hackney and Southwark and, you know, Hounslow and a whole bunch of boroughs really starting to deliver and move forward very rapidly. But we're also seeing some boroughs where, you know, even just, you know, we're seeing boroughs where they've you know, committed to a climate emergency. They've made a declaration of climate emergency, but even talking about car use reduction or talking about cycling is still kind of slightly, you know, taboo subject. So we've got a long way to go with some boroughs, and we're obviously working with every borough. So the boroughs that are moving fast, we're trying to get to move even faster, but the boroughs that are doing very little or nothing, we're trying to get them started and moving in the right direction.
That's brilliant. And so you've clearly got a vision for what the mobility industry needs to do in the next few years. So what has the London Cycling Campaign got planned in the next 12 to 18 months? What's the next big step that you're going to take? if you can
So
say.
yeah, no, I can. Yeah, we've got multiple, as I said, we've got multiple campaigns running at once. In the next 12 to 18 months, we're going to face another mayoral election. So Sadiq was re-elected in 2021. It was meant to be 2020, but some things got in the way. So in 2024, he faces an election again. And he said he's standing. We obviously will work with him and the other mayoral candidates to make sure that they're really committed to delivering, because by 2024, we'll have 6 years left, one and a bit mayoral terms, to get to 2030 and to get to net zero in theory. So we know that there's a real urgency now in the mayoral elections coming up. So there will be a climate themed campaign, no doubt, around that and around ensuring that the next mayor commits really strongly. We're also holding Sadiq to account over the last year of his current mayoralty. So, he's got to crack on as well. Like, he's been doing some good work. He's announced ULEZ expansion. He's doing other stuff, but that there's more he can and should be doing. So we'll be working at the mayoral level. We're just in May, we had the local elections. We had, I think, 14 leaders of councils commit to our Climate Safe Streets asks for them. We had asks for each borough, and we're obviously holding them to account and saying, okay, you said you were going to do X, Y, and Z. You've now got to do X, Y, and Z. Get on with it. So we're working with the boroughs there. There's going to be, that's our climate campaigning. We also are working up, and have been for some time, a dangerous junctions campaign. We recognised a while ago that this was something where we just repetitively and depressingly had to keep coming back to pointing out the fact that some of our worst junctions in London, keep killing, will keep killing, not just cyclists, but again, pedestrians. And so we made a decision that we weren't going to let these junctions just kind of make a big noise and then let them go away. We were going to keep pushing and pushing and pushing. So there's more work coming on that. We produced a map of dangerous junctions, the worst junctions in London, kind of last year, but only really for central London. And we're now going to take that across the whole of London, and we're going to make it much more interactive and complicated and hopefully revealing. So we'll be able to talk about the worst junctions in every borough and, where the worst junction is near you and things like that. So there's a bunch of work there. What else is there? We're also rolling out. We're very busy. The other thing that
sounds
we're doing,
like it.
yeah. So the other thing that we're doing is we're increasingly doing a work around behaviour change. So we recognise that infrastructure isn't the only thing that enables people to cycle. So again, people who look like me in London quite often cycle even without any infrastructure. They don't need a cycle track. They'll just get on their bike and ride. But if you want to get women and kids and black people and all sorts of people cycling, disabled people, you need more. But it turns out that isn't just infrastructure, that is also behaviour change as well. What we recognised is that, where we've seen, like Waltham Forest, where I'm based, where you've seen rollout of cycle tracks, low traffic neighbours, lots of schemes, and you're starting to see a coherent network of cycling routes, then suddenly you have an opportunity to say to people who would never have considered cycling before, culturally, demographically, whatever, there's a real opportunity to say, hey, you hadn't really thought about cycling, but now if you get on your bike, you can just go. It's not complicated or difficult. There aren't. So trying to make sure that those folks, and some of those folks have additional barriers, whether that's disabled people who need a loan or the ownership of an adapted bicycle or cycle or a trike or whatever, whether that's groups who culturally are looking across at most people are cycling and going, I don't look anything like you. I need role models, I need some support, whether that's people who've never learned to cycle, etc. So there's a bunch of other work that we recognise that goes on top of the infrastructure, as it were. Once the infrastructure rolled out, it particularly gets easier. So we're increasingly doing that. In a lot of our boroughs, we now have a thing called cycle buddies. So we have people who are local volunteers. If you want to learn to cycle, well, in fact, not if you want to learn to cycle, this most boroughs brilliantly have cycle instructors and free cycle training. But if you want to learn how to get from A to B, like, as in, I want to start at my house, I want to get to my work, I want to get to the shops, I want to ride to cinema, how can you do it? Now in London, there's not tons of signage yet, and there's not loads and loads of really coherent routes that happen to be right from where you want to start to where you want to go. But what we do is we pair people up and say, right, okay, you ride from here to here, you ride in this borough, all the shortcuts and all the nice routes and all the good places, take these people out, like, go ride one ride. So Right, socially get a chance to chat to people, but also feel confident about your roots and things like that. So we've got that running, and increasingly we're doing that now. The NHS is we're increasingly working lots with the NHS on behaviour change. So I think there has been a real change in the NHS, you know, where a lot of the hospitals in London are still really covered in car parking, and you've got, you know, even central London hospitals with huge amounts of car parking, and so the NHS has traditionally been quite a car dominated environment. And suddenly what you're seeing is a load of NHS doctors, quite rightly, and NHS clinicians and nurses and workers, and people going, A, I don't want to cycle to work. You know, sorry, I don't want to drive to work. I want to cycle to work. B, my patients who have got physical inactivity related ill health, pollution related ill health, you know, who are suffering from asthma, who are doing all sorts of stuff, heart disease, etc. They need to do more physical activity. That is a really big important thing for longevity, for health, etc. So we're starting to see a movement of social prescribing, as it's called, and we're working with the NHS increasingly on cycle buddies within the NHS, both for workers and for people who are in rehab or recovering or at risk. So we're doing a lot of work on that front, and then we're doing an increasing amount of other kind of behaviour change programs, working with boroughs, working with communities to say, hey, you can cycle, and here's a bunch of extra additional tools, resources, stuff to help you.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because when people think about getting people on their bikes, they do initially think of infrastructure, but it's interesting listening to you say all of that, that there's so many other factors, isn't there? You know, social, environmental, you know, cultural. There's so much stuff that goes on, isn't there? And sometimes people just don't think about those sort of things, do they?
That's, you know, there has been a real, I think that's one of the great things about London, and the great things about this kind of movement that's been built not just in London but across the world with cities, is I think people are starting to find different ways to unpick some of the knotty kind of problems of what we've done with our cities for the last 50 years or so, which is just cover them in cars. And now we're starting to say, well, okay, that's not working very well, you know, for health, for, you know, climate, for everything, but also, and congestion, but also how do we then unpick that and move that forward? And yeah, like cycle tracks and things like that are the first part of a journey, but we're now starting to look ahead and go, yeah, it's not the only step in the journey, and there are other steps to take.
No, brilliant. Well, you've got a lot to do in the next few years, don't you? But thank
Yeah,
you so much for taking the time out of your day to join us today, and we look forward to hearing from you soon.
great stuff.